Good evening. We've been handed a number of questions. I will begin, and then when I've finished answering the ones that related to my studies, I'll hand over to Elder Parminder, and he also has some to answer. The first question I want to address says, I agree with you about the role of the mother, the papacy, but I want to know the role of the daughter, Protestants, at the end of the world. So I'm not sure who asked this or if they want to engage in a discussion. If people want to stay anonymous, that's fine. If they want to say that was my question and discuss it, that's fine with me as well. So we've been looking at, from a lot of last year, we focused primarily on the role of Protestantism, and the reason that we did that is because it was so difficult for people to see, particularly as Protestantism, the actions of Protestantism, many people saw as correct and right. As Protestantism tries to end immigration from certain areas, people saw that as reasonable and right. As Protestantism tried to end abortion, people think, well, that's a good thing. As Protestantism tried to enact Bible readings in schools, many people thought, well, that's a good thing. So people saw the actions of Protestantism as a positive, and that had to be counteracted. So a large part of the shaking that has occurred is because what prophecy demonstrates is happening right now regarding conservative Protestantism in the United States, conflicted with people's both religious preconceived ideas and political preconceived ideas. So I recognize we've spent a lot of time, particularly last year, laboring over the role of Protestantism in the United States. And I fear that in doing that, people have started to lose sight of the role of the papacy. So now we're coming back and reinforcing the role of the papacy at the end of the world. So when we think about how we understand, when we talk about the end of the world, I'm assuming people really can mean anywhere from the time of the end. But I think many people are meaning particularly the Sunday law history. And we've already traced the line of the Nethinims. We've already traced 2014 as the time of the end. 2019, this dispensation of ploughing. We traced 2021, their Sunday law, then Sunday law on the line of the 144,000, and close of probation, Daniel 12:1. So we've traced their reform line of the world, and I'm not sure if the person who asked this question has actually been there for these presentations through the week. Perhaps it's a visitor. I would assume the students would all remember what we've done when we've traced conservative Protestantism on this reform line. And when we go back to the 144,000, and we see how they began 1979, 1989. The role of the moral majority. This work is all conservative Protestantism when we talk about Jerry Falwell, moral majority, the bringing together of church and state in America. We talk about our three Sunday laws, 1863, 1888, 1893. So the person asking this question has said, I can see and I agree with the role of the papacy at the end of the world. Then what about the role of Protestantism? If you haven't been there for the studies this week, please go back and watch those classes. We discussed this history as outlined in the Great Controversy. Who enacted the Sunday law of this history? Protestantism. We discussed this morning and throughout the week the triple application of prophecy, 1850, 1888, the Sunday law history, and it has to be the 1850 early writings narrative plus the 1888 great controversy narrative that will equal the Sunday law in our history. 1850, the United States is about to be judged because they have just filled the cup of their sin. And what filled that cup? Slavery. Who does Ellen White blame for slavery? Protestant churches. Ellen White blames the Protestant churches for the issue of slavery. 1888 Sunday law. Who's to blame for the Sunday laws in 1888 history? So this is Protestantism that filled America's cup of sin. This is Protestantism that filled America's cup of sin. So the Sunday law waymark, who does that work? So whether we're discussing equality or church and state, whichever story that we're going to, early writing story, great controversy story, it's the work of Protestantism in the United States consistently. So we know at the end of the world that when we bring together these two applications, inequality symbolized by slavery in its literal history, that church and state issue symbolized by the enforcement of Sunday in great controversy history, bringing them to our time, it's consistently the work of the Protestant churches. Do we have any question based on that? Does that make sense? So when the questioner asks that they agree with the role of the papacy, I'm glad for that, because that is what people have struggled with the most, seeing that the papacy has a role to play at the end of the world. Then they're asking about the role of the door to Protestantism. It's Protestantism that combines church and state. In America, they began it in 1979, and for the last 40 years, 41 years now, they have been continuing that work. They turned to that work with a whole new degree of enthusiasm in 2014, which caused the election of Donald Trump. But we have 40 years of history of tracing the role of Protestantism in America. And we know that as they embrace Donald Trump, as they combine church and state, as they take over the judicial system, American courts, that they are also setting America up for the Sunday law. I'll move on from that one, if the questioner is content with that answer.
In that question, he asked about the role of papacy at the end of the world.
Protestantism.
He said,
I want to know the role of the door to Protestantism at the end of the world. Second question. This question is to inquire and not to rebel on the subject of equality. How can we help our sisters who are not following the principles given in HL 119.1? A plain direct testimony is now needed in regard to plainness of dress. This should be our burden, but it is too late now to become enthusiastic in making a test of this matter. There are some things which made the Reformed dress, which was once advocated, a decided blessing. With it, the ridiculous hoops which were then the fashion could not be worn. The long dress skirts trailing on the ground and sweeping up the filth of the streets could not be patronized. But a more sensible style of dress has been adopted, which does not embrace these objectionable features. The fashionable part may be discarded and should be by all who read the Word of God. The dress of our people should be made most simple. The skirt and sack I have mentioned may be used, not that just that pattern and nothing else should be established, but a simple style as was represented in that dress. Some have supposed that the very pattern given was the pattern that all should adopt. This is not so, but something as simple as this would be the best we could adopt under the circumstances. Simple dress should be the word. Try your talents, my sisters, in this essential reform. Let our sisters dress plainly, as many do, in having the dress of good material, durable, modest, appropriate for the age, and let not the dress question fill the mind. So the person is asking, how can we help our sisters who are not following the principles of the quote I just read? Modesty, especially. I see some may go to extremes in wearing tight trousers. Do we have freedom as men to advise them when we see them putting on pants which is not modest? So first of all, the quote that has been given alongside with this question is not about trousers. What is the point of the quote? It's not even modesty. There's nothing immodest about wearing skirts that trail on the ground. That's not immodesty. She says you don't have to wear the reform dress, just follow the principles of that dress. And what are the principles she's giving? Simple, durable material, sensible. So I'm not sure why this quote has been attached to a subject of trousers, and it's not even relating primarily to a modesty issue. There's nothing that immodest about hoops. It's just not practical or sensible or actually safe. So the question is asked, do we have freedom as men to advise them when we see them putting on pants which is not modest? So I'm going to ask a question to the sisters, and I have a feeling there's going to be silence. But if you want to answer, I would be grateful. Sisters, do you get attracted to a man in tight pants? A tight shirt when he has muscle, six-pack, we call it in Australia. You don't. You don't see a man down the street and he's really muscly and he's got a tight shirt on. You don't find that attractive. You don't think he's nice, he looks nice. Sorry. Didn't mean to. Any sister willing to say yes? Sister Snyder, you're talking back there and I want to know what the point was. It's okay. What we're dealing with, we may laugh, but I don't think people realize the legacy issues of sexism. One of the legacy issues is that there is something wrong about a woman being attracted to a man. Men can be attracted to women, that's okay. But for sisters to say that they find men physically attractive has, not just in Christianity, in the world at large, in the secular world, it's seen as something inappropriate. Women can't admit to that. It's okay for a man to be attracted to a woman, but there's something dirty or defiled about a woman admitting she's attracted to a man. We have a huge discrepancy with how we see a woman's sexuality and a man's sexuality. You can see that through society over the last 100 years. That's become an issue. As many women have stood up and said, I'm no different to a man, I get attracted to people's bodies too. And people then think those women are dirty. But if a man says, I'm attracted to a woman's body, people think that's normal. There's a huge discrepancy in what a man is permitted to do and say and think and what a woman is permitted to do and say and think. But the reality of it, as society is proving, as well as science, is we're not that different. All the women that said no, by and large, I don't believe you. I think society and pressure and sexism has taught you that you're not allowed to say yes. And when it comes down to it, we are equally find other people's bodies attractive. The reason I go to this question is because there seems to be this persistent idea that physical attraction is something that men battle with and women don't. And therefore women need to make all these efforts and there's no expectations on the men. And so to answer the question, do we have freedom as men to advise them when we see them putting on pants which is not modest? No, you do not have freedom to advise them. Simple answer. Please don't let me hear of any men doing that. I would suggest that the men look at what they're wearing, because I see plenty of men in this movement who are not necessarily straight and thin like a beanpole in tight pants, and they can be quite revealing, and in tight shirts, tight suits, which are designed to be flattering, just as much as women's clothes are designed to be flattering. And when she's talking about of good material, modest, simple, these are principles that are attached as much to men. And there's men who like their sports logos, their bright colours with the sports shoes that the basketball stars wear. They can come under this. Even within the movement, when I see what men wear in the movement, they can struggle with these principles almost, I would say, to an equal degree as some of the sisters. So I think we should not just take these principles as something we need to police in our women. A bit more universal than that. So the last question I want to touch on, and then I want to hand it over to Elder Parminder, and I think I'll just touch on this. We did last Sabbath, we did a line of progression. We did a line of progression from Eden. When we're dealing with equality, we could have done it with dress, with racism, with diet, with racism, with sexism. Different ways you can all see a line of progression. Began in Eden, there is equality, everything living in peace and harmony. If they had have lived without sin for long enough, you would have had different races, different coloured skin. They all would have been equal. Different genders still would have been equal. Humanity and the animal kingdom all living together in harmony. No suffering would have entered Eden. But we know because of sin on every one of those levels, it was not so. So inequality comes in after Eden. We come to the history of Abraham, and he is slave owner, and he's also over his wife. I'm just going to put submission. We come to the history of, Alpha history of ancient Israel. Ancient Israel, their Alpha history. Then we come down to the history of Christ, the Omega, of ancient Israel. That's the end of inspiration. Then we discussed our Alpha history. This is modern Israel. And then Omega of modern Israel. This being Millerites, this being 144,000. So we traced all the way from Eden through to our own history when we're heading back to Eden, and we dealt with those subjects of diet, racism, and sexism. The question that we've asked before this study was done, I never heard asked in this movement. So I just want to suggest that we're looking at a cause to an effect. This study was done, and then these questions start to develop. Is it true that if one has the 25-20 and the lines, then there is no need of Sabbath keeping according to the Spirit of Prophecy writings? So, what they're asking is we have had present truth for each dispensation since 1989. We've had the present truth of line upon line, Daniel 11:40-45. They haven't included those, but I'm adding them in. Then we've had 25-20 and time setting, and then we have had the issue of equality, racism, sexism. We've dealt with all of those subjects prophetically, and they're saying that if we've had the testing truths for these dispensations, is there any need of Sabbath keeping according to the Spirit of Prophecy writings? So I want to go to a couple of quotes. Genesis chapter 2. Genesis chapter 2, verses 1-3. Heaven and earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day God ended his work which he had made, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had made. And God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because that in it he had rested from all his work which God created and made. So perfect Eden, before the creation of man, what is introduced? The Sabbath. And what does God do on the Sabbath? Rest. The quote I want to go to is in the Great Controversy 453.1. Great Controversy 453.1. Hallowed by the Creator's rest and blessing, the Sabbath was kept by Adam in his innocence in holy Eden. By Adam fallen yet repentant when he was driven from his happy estate. So Adam before sin, he kept the Sabbath. After sin, he kept the Sabbath. Is there any change before and after sin? No. It was kept by all the patriarchs from Abel to Noah to Abraham to Jacob. So, before sin, there's Sabbath. After sin, there's Sabbath. Abraham, we could trace Noah, kept the Sabbath. Abraham kept the Sabbath. When the chosen people were in Egypt, many, in the midst of prevailing idolatry, lost their knowledge of God's law. But when the Lord delivered Israel, he proclaimed his law in awful grandeur to the assembled multitude, that they might know his will and fear and obey him forever. So ancient Israel, what were they told to do? Keep the Sabbath. Down to the history of Christ. When Christ dies, he rests in the tomb, doesn't he? Even in death, he kept the Sabbath. Before his death, what did he do on the Sabbath? He went to church, took a scroll and read, didn't he? So he kept the Sabbath. We come down to Millerite history, and we don't need to read Ellen White's quotes on the Sabbath because the questioner knows them, he's referring to them. So my point is when we do this line of progression and people start seeing progression and thinking that things change from one dispensation to another, it's coming back to our same problem that I keep saying that we have, juggling two concepts at the same time. People struggle to juggle the concepts that the papacy is active and Protestantism is active, distinct but separate. That we have an issue symbolized by 1850 and 1888, both concepts. So I think people are, and not just here, movement-wide, people can be struggling to juggle two concepts, two methodologies. We have progression, and what's the other? Sorry? Repeat and enlarge. And we can see consistently from Eden through to Eden, there has been no change of progression on the issue of the Sabbath. It is not a dispensational subject. Instead, to understand the Sabbath, we would not use this methodology, we would use this methodology. Abraham kept the Sabbath, we kept the Sabbath. We can cut the line and overlay them and understand Sabbath keeping. We have to understand these two methodologies. In using one, we can't lose our grip on the other. What we have to do is become intelligent about how we use them. So I've answered part one of this question. The second part is how should we apply spirit of prophecy statements on Sabbath keeping? Plain reading or prophetically, symbolically, according to our dispensation. So how do we use the spirit of prophecy quotes on Sabbath keeping? And I might pass over to my associate if he also wants to deal with this question. Or
Which question, one or two?
I kind of answered the first one that it's not
Okay.
dispensational, but I didn't go into the research.
So question one, is it time that if one has the 2520 and the lines, then there is no need of Sabbath keeping according to the Spirit of Prophecy writings? So I guess what they mean is that the Spirit of Prophecy says that we do need to keep the Sabbath, and therefore if we keep the 2520 and we follow the lines, then do we have license to ignore what the Spirit of Prophecy teaches on the issue of Sabbath keeping? And I presume the reason that people are asking that question is because of the issue of Revelation 14 verses 9 to 11, which is the third angel's message. The third angel's message speaks about the mark of the beast, and we as a church define what the mark of the beast is. We say the mark of the beast is the authority of the beast, its mark of authority, which is its ability to change the day of worship from Saturday to Sunday, or Sabbath to Sunday, seventh day to the first day. And therefore we say that the mark of the beast is the issue of Sunday legislation, and Ellen White comments on that And because we say that the Sunday law as we understand it, that we've been taught, is not really a viable proposition anymore, based upon our understanding of end-time prophecy, then do we even need to keep the Sabbath at all? I guess that's what the question is. And I don't think I want to say much more about that. I think it's clear that we don't believe that, and neither is that what we're teaching. Just because we're saying that there is not going to be this Saturday-Sunday fight across the world, it doesn't mean that we suggest that we should not be keeping Sabbath. So if that answered the question, whoever's question that was. Everybody okay? Or does somebody want to respond to that or say something? How should one apply spirit of prophecy statements on Sabbath keeping? Is it plain reading or prophetically, symbolically in our dispensation? Well, if you want to make any kind of prophetic or symbolic application in any dispensation, first of all you need to understand a plain reading of God's word. And I would argue that this concept of what plain reading even looks like for most of us is a misunderstanding. From the context of the question, how should one apply spirit of prophecy statements on Sabbath keeping? We should read those statements just as they're written, in the framework that they're written in, and with the intent that they were written in. Don't think we have any problems with any of that. Is there some kind of prophetic... Thank you. No, keep it there. It's all right. We'll deal with the paper. Does it have also some prophetic or symbolic... is there any kind of prophetic or symbolic application that we can make in our dispensation? For sure there is. The whole issue of Sabbath and being rest is a root word for what? Restoration. So restoration comes from the word rest. And one of the things that all of us know, even before these prophetic studies came about, the Midnight Cry message, when we speak about equality, is the subject or the issue of restoration. So the idea of Eden to Eden, or us returning to heaven where everything gets sorted out, is not anything that's strange or new to us. Agree with that? So the idea of God restoring things is, I'm going to say, standard Adventist theology. It's well within our understanding of what God is trying to do, the subject of restoration. So when we think about the weekly Sabbath, or in Leviticus 25, the 7 yearly Sabbaths, or we read in Deuteronomy that every 7th year there's going to be a reading of the law. All of these things teach us one common thought or one common idea, which is what? Restoration. So the idea that the 7th day Sabbath is some kind of 24-hour period, and it's not even 24 hours because we sleep for a fair proportion of that, and we eat for a fair proportion of that. So if you actually work out how many hours that you're not eating or sleeping or traveling or doing anything, it's only a few short hours. It's not 24 hours in the way that we speak about it. What's the purpose of that time? Is it so that we can have more time to rest, or we're tired from our 6 days of work? Is that the purpose of it? We know it's not, because Sabbath was given to us before all of those, before the model of heavy labour or working by the sweat of our brow. Adam and Eve didn't work like that, did they? So they were not tired. I don't think they probably even got tired in the same way that we would understand. So what's the purpose of the Sabbath? It's a time period that's set aside for some special use. We call it holy use. So when we come out of Eden into our sinful world, I would argue that the primary purpose of the Sabbath is not to rest from your weekly labours, so you have a lie-in on Sabbath, or that you don't do anything, or you don't wash dishes. I don't think that's the purpose of the Sabbath. I think the purpose of the Sabbath is to teach us about restoration. And has restoration occurred for the last 6,000 years? Essentially, no, but we practice it every week. So just at that simplistic level, the Sabbath, not only in our dispensation, but in any dispensation, should always have been understood prophetically or symbolically, shouldn't it? That seventh day should always be understood that way. The whole issue about the 7-yearly cycle, it's not just about enriching the soil and getting fertile crops. We know it doesn't work that way. The miracle of essentially producing 3 years' worth of crops from one piece of field goes beyond the issue of crop rotation and fertilization and resting the soil. There's some kind of miracle that's going on there. God is teaching us something about restoration. So the idea that we're doing something strange now, where we need to understand the Sabbath prophetically or symbolically in our dispensation, it's not a dispensational issue. It should always have been understood that way. All we're doing is highlighting those points in a way that hopefully should make things clear. But what's at the back of this questioner's question, I assume, is that seeing as that we teach that there's no Saturday-Sunday fight, does that mean we need to be still keeping Saturday, obviously Sabbath in the context that it is? And the answer is yes, we should read it as plainly written, follow it as plainly written, and it still has prophetic or symbolic meaning for our dispensation. I think people are suggesting that we've gone so far that we no longer agree with the Sabbath, and I think that's just not true. So, I don't want to particularly go over this issue about the dress question. It would be nice to know who asked the question, because I'd want to ask them why they have an issue to sort of address the sisters. What are they worried about? Are they worried about the sister's protection? They're trying to protect her from someone? Or are they trying to protect the sister from themselves? They can't take their eyes off them. I think it's important to understand what is behind this person's question. I do think it is a reality. Maybe if you were born in an Adventist and you've always grown up in this conservative culture, that you didn't think this way. But certainly in the world that I lived, just a normal world, when I used to speak with my cousins, none of them were Adventists, everybody knew that when a handsome man came into the room, I think the word we use in the UK is swoon. I don't know if you have that word here. Their hearts flutter when they see a handsome man come in. I don't know why we're not willing to admit that. I've been into many young women's bedrooms, but that's not quite true, to say it that way. But half of my cousins were women, and if you go to their house, you see the posters that are on their wall. The posters are not of attractive women. At least all the cousins that I had who were girls, they had posters of handsome men, often bare-topped, often well-proportioned, handsome, really nice teeth, everything. They just look beautiful men. I think there's not a problem with being a beautiful man. We call them handsome today. In the olden days, they'd call women handsome. We just sort of got this gender issue that men are handsome, women are pretty. But the idea that men can be pretty, I don't think it's strange, because 200 years ago, a beautiful woman would be called a handsome woman. It's just... No, it's just the way the word was used. It's just words have changed over history. I just don't think I think we're living in a pretend world. Even the sisters that aren't willing to talk. I know even in Adventist circles, in this movement, when the sisters get together, the ones that are ready for marriage or thinking about it, they giggle between themselves and they kind of point and they're all talking about that handsome brother over there. Just like the boys are. It's not any different. So I think it's wise for the boys to look at themselves. Maybe if you want to tell anybody off, tell the other boys off. Tell them how to dress properly. Not to wear skin-tight trousers so you can see your bulging thighs. Which turns on women, by the way, in case you didn't know. Oh, there was another question. I didn't see this one. Did you have a look at this one? Oh, it's on the back side. I would like to know, I don't know what this question is, so we might not answer it. This is the surprise question. I would like to know, for I know that the Nephilim are being ploughed by the external events, CNN, Michael Moore, etc. But how is the Nephilims of other places, not in America, being ploughed? E.g., the place where I come from. No one knows about CNN, Fox News, Jerry Falwell, etc., and they have not heard of it. The only people who have heard of these people are those in the movement. So let me try and reframe the question. Basically, in this movement, we talk in the framework of America, but in many parts of the world, they don't understand what's going on in America. So how are all these people in the rest of the world being ploughed? So I'm not an expert on all the countries of the world, but I would suggest, and I think probably we tend to go on these two because they're quite widely reported on, even though we may not know the names. India and Brazil. Two extremely large countries with, I guess in the past, they would be considered just like bland countries. No one ever heard anything bad or anything good, particularly about any of those countries. They just seem to be stable, not crazy, not problematic. Now, China has been problematic in many ways. Maybe they just get bad news coverage. But Brazil and India really never did. So today they've come in the news because of their respective presidents and the approach that they've taken in governance, the way they want to govern their countries. So if I were to ask all of you, have you heard about that? I think all of you would say yes, but you've all heard the presentation, so that's why that might be the case. But I would suggest it's been widely reported, and people who understand current affairs, wherever you are in the world, will know about that issue, even if they don't understand the dynamics. They're aware of those issues. And if you live in India or Brazil, you may never heard of these people, Moore and Falwell, etc. But you've got people in your own countries, in their own countries, they have the equivalent of those people who are standing up and making their voices known in opposition to the work of their respective governments. So if a government has got the equivalent of the Republican Party or this right-wing conservative White House, and increasingly countries have, then they have voices that are resisting or fighting against them. Some are more advanced than others. So I would argue that it's not just people in the movement, people across the world are being ploughed in their own unique circumstances. If you're not keeping up with the news, if you're blind to that, whoever you are, whether you're in the movement or in the world, you will be swept away by that. And the thing is, no one can escape this. Because if you live in Brazil and you haven't heard of these people, or you haven't heard of the opposition, you're going to have to make a decision whether you like the government or you don't like the government. So I think this idea that not everybody's heard of Michael Moore is really a misunderstanding of how this is working. And rather than go against what this movement teaches, I think it actually bolsters or confirms our point. How so? The typical Adventist perspective is what? All the world looks to where? Looks to the United States. They look to the United States where everything's going to happen. That's what Adventists do, and the Adventists want to train everyone else to do that. Or the papacy, the way you want to go, depending on your perspective. Because we say that they're in bed together, it's one and the same thing. So Adventists think that way, and I would suggest that questioner, before they got into the movement, they thought that way as well, unless they came straight into this movement from the world recently. That they were educated to think that it's all an American issue. In fact, what we're teaching is that it's not an American issue. That's what makes this message so different, so unique, and so truthful, which is why we speak about the fact that there is no literal Sunday law in the way Adventists teach, because to design that model demands what? It demands your focus of attention is on the United States, which means you have to be an expert on US politics. And as the questioner says, most people aren't. And therefore, we actually don't have a model that's really fit for purpose. I think I addressed this last week. We're going into sort of responding to the same question, because it's a very similar question. So we in this movement are teaching that you have American dynamics going on all across the world today in 2020 in varying degrees in various places on their line. Some countries are more advanced than others. I mentioned last week about Zambia, and then someone said, oh, I made a mistake, I was talking about Uganda, because I guess the same thing is happening in Uganda which has happened in Zambia, but I hadn't heard about the issue in Uganda. So in Zambia, recently, I spoke about a homosexual couple. They were prosecuted, and I think sentenced with a heavy prison sentence, a long-term prison sentence, for basically being a couple. And the argument that was given was that it's a Christian nation. Same argument that America's using now. So from that, you can see that the Zambians are dealing with the same issue that the Americans are dealing with. So, I apologize, I don't know the name of the Zambian president, but whoever he is, he's just, sometimes you talk about a mini version of Trump, but I don't want to say it in that derogatory way. He's just another version, another facet of the same issue. It's not the same problem, because they don't do that in the United States. In fact, the United States was one of the first countries that condemned him to do it. The US Embassy, the ambassador, said it was crazy, wicked. So America realizes that that's not, you can't legislate against that issue. But the point I want to bring up is the dynamic that we're bringing up in America. You see similar issues all across the world. Now, I'm not trying to say the US ambassador is their Michael Moore, but if they've got a president who's having the same mindset for the same reasons, using the same logic as that which is occurring in the United States, if you believe in repeat and enlarge, line upon line, then you know that they must have their equivalent of Michael Moore. He may not be a film director, he could be a journalist, he could have another post, he might be a novelist, I don't know who he is or she, but they would have an equivalent. So I don't know whose question that was, but does that make sense? Yeah? So I hope the person who says yes was one of the people who asked the question. So you don't need to have heard of Michael Moore. At that level, CNN and Michael Moore become symbols. I think I've certainly said that in the past, and I think Elder Tess as well. CNN is not the definitive issue, it's just a symbol that we can latch onto to see a principle that's going throughout the world. It's not that CNN are the very thing, or Fox. It's just that they're used as symbols for a wider problem. Even in the United States, they're just symbols for a wider issue. Oh, sorry, this has been answered. I find it interesting when people say, I do agree with you, and then they, halfway through, they said, but. From 1989 to 9/11, from 1989 to 9/11 dispensation, two streams test internally. I think there's two questions. Is one, Jeff, the messenger, plus Daniel 11:40-45, the message? Okay, so question part 2. The SDA conference structure. Okay, whoever's question this, they may need to help me. That's what it looks like. So I think the question is, from 1989 to 9/11, that dispensation, there are two streams. I think the person's saying, are the two streams Elder Jeff Pippinger and his message, one stream, and the SDA conference structure? Is that the question? Whose question is it? Is it your question? How do you know that's not the question then? You seem confident. Okay. You're a better reader than I am. Is it secret? Am I just misreading that? So, the second part is it safe for us as priests in this dispensation to go to church, 2019 to 2021? So I didn't know if it was two separate questions. Is it two separate questions? Is it, why don't just put your hand up? Just answer. Why? It's a good question. It's not. Okay, if they're not going to tell me who it is, I just have to do the best thing. So I think this is asking, there are two streams from 1989 to 11, this movement and the SDA conference structure. And we're being tested. Sure, two streams of information. I think it's a bigger issue than that, but at that level, yeah, there are two streams. Choose which one you want to follow. That's safe. In that dispensation, by the way, 89 to 9/11, we should be going to church. We should be going to conference structure churches. And then from 9/11 to 2014, in that dispensation, there are two streams of information, and we should still be going to church. And then from 2014 to 2019, there are two streams of information, and we should still be going to church. And today, 2019, 2021, should we go to church? I think we should still be going to church. Don't see any difference. We should still be going to church. The problem is it gets harder and harder to go to church. So I don't know why we'd stop going to church, because we need to communicate with the people. But the problem is many of us are unable to do so. So one of the reasons why we can't is because we behave badly, or we've behaved so badly in the past that we've burnt bridges, and people don't want anything to do with us. And that's not always our fault. You know, our message is pretty crazy, and we say things, even though we just say what the message teaches, people don't accept it. So we sound like crazy people, so they don't want anything to do with us. So part of the reason why we can't go to church is because there's no relationship with them. There's no way of helping them, and we end up making things worse, so we end up stop going to church. Perhaps we follow the counsel. If they reject you in this city, wipe the dust off your feet and go somewhere else. And maybe we've come to a place that we've gone through all the cities of Jerusalem, of Judea, Israel, and now the second Advent's coming. But yeah, why should we not be going there? How are they going to hear the message otherwise? I don't know why we seem to think that's wrong. I've never understood that. I think it's extremely difficult nowadays to go to church, depending on your locality. There are plenty people in the movement who still go to church. Plenty of people. Maybe it's the only place that they can get fellowship. Maybe they've got a position in the church and they use that for their advantage. They have an influence there. I don't know why we think that's wrong. Any problems with that people have an issue with that? I think it's widely recognised. If this movement today has got 2,000 people in it across the world, I suspect only 10% go to church. I think it's very few nowadays. Before it was a lot more people. Maybe 200 of us out of the 2,000, maybe a few more, go to a proper church and behave like normal Adventists. Most of us don't, because we're unable to, not because it's wrong. That's not a movement position, that's my understanding. Any questions on that?
Well, when you say that there will be no people joining us,
So the question is, Sister Elizabeth thought there would be no one joining us, Levites, therefore we shouldn't join them, or we shouldn't call them, or?
I'm saying there's no need of going there because they are not going to come.
I think if we don't go and help them, they're never going to come. This issue about the 4 dispensations, we can be quite. I'm going to address this in my next question with a quote. We can say things in very strong fashion, and sometimes when we give things in a really strong fashion, we can leave the impression that is the only way of seeing things. If we priests are all on this side, and we figured out who we were without the world, which is pretty much what we did, didn't we? We didn't have the world to figure out who we were, so we kind of call that internal. And we go to the Nethinims, and they're figuring out who they are without our help completely. We call it external. I just want to make a suggestion that the Levites are kind of in between. 1 foot in the world and 1 foot in the church, if I can say it that way. We might just call them liberal Adventists, publicans and sinners. The story of who the neighbour is. They're so unclean, people on this side like us would consider them not even to be Adventists. And the people in the world would say they have some crazy ideas. They want to go home early on Fridays, and they seem so normal otherwise. So they're kind of stuck in the middle. If we just took that concept, I want to suggest that not only are the Levites being trained and educated by the world, just like the Nethinims are, and just like we are now, they'd been trained in that way as well, but Adventists hear about us. If you go to, is it Kakamega, the Western District in Kenya? If you go to university there, you never heard of this movement. The first thing they do is they give you a pack, a welcome pack, when you join the university, which says, warning, don't join that fanatical group. So they'd never heard of us. They were being ploughed by the world. Not in that, I don't mean the Levites are being ploughed now, but they're being educated by the world, trained, ploughed, I'll use it. As soon as you get to the university, what happens? They get informed or now educated by us. They give you a pack that tells them who we are. And they say, oh, I never heard about these people. Maybe they're interesting. Let me go and find out. They wouldn't have done that if they'd kept silent. So the Levites are certainly interacting with us at some level. So it's not as black and white to say that the Levites are untouched by us as a movement. I don't think that's the case. For a start, maybe some of us are too young to know this, but only a few years ago, there were many books, online things, videos against this movement, and the primary thing that they would attack was the 2520. They did booklet after booklet, conferences about that the 2520 is wrong. So all I want to say is that Levites have to have interaction with us. Even if they don't have to, they're having interaction with us. I think I could give an argument that they have to have interaction with us because they're Adventists. We rub shoulders, you can't help it. So if that's the case, then interacting with these people is not only inevitable, it's necessary. If you've got Adventist parents and they're in this movement, what are they? We call them Levites. So you live with them, of course you're interacting with them. They think you're crazy perhaps. But they're learning this message from you. Whether you're doing it good or bad, or whether they're accepting is a different issue. So interacting with Levites, I don't think is what the problem is. Remember, these lines are make-believe. They're a very simplified version of a complex subject. The lines teach that the Levites are not going to come in. We're already into January, 2 months into our dispensation of the harvest, where we say they're not coming in. You might think it's 24 months. It may not be 24 months, it may not be 2 years, it could be a lot less. The minimum it could be would be around 13 months. 2 months have already gone, so we could be looking at, as of now, only 12 months before they could legitimately start coming in if we're going to address it at that legalistic level. And we don't even have our house in order. So I think we need to be careful about getting this parabolic model and trying to say, what that means is there won't be any Levites joining us. I've never thought that. I think plenty of Levites will join us on a Sabbath. They'll come to a camp meeting in Lyra, perhaps, when we have the camp meeting here. Lots of those people could be Levites who are coming to our meetings. Doesn't mean they sign up, doesn't mean they commit. If we were doing baptismal classes properly, by the way, baptismal classes should take 4 to 6 months once the person has begun to take the class. If you have a Levite coming in now, coming to our meetings, they don't even understand what we're talking about. So they'd be here for a few months, 3 or 4 months, before they get to say, okay, I think I want to get baptized. Then it'd be another 4 to 6 months. That's easily, if you did it properly, 12 months before they could ever join us, couldn't it? So if someone joined us now and we followed the rules properly, and I'm saying this for a reason because many of us, many ministries, many teachers are not following these rules properly about how to join the movement. The training that you receive is people get baptized prematurely. And we would not expect someone to walk in today on Sabbath and say, oh, you people are great, this is the gospel truth, can I get baptized? And we'd say, yes, sure you can, but you have to do 4 months of classes so they can get baptized in January, February, March, April, May. Yeah, so we say, you can get baptized in May now. Could we do that? No, we could not. Well, what would we say? You don't even know what we teach. Come to our weekly sessions for about 3 or 4 months, 6 months. And then we'll begin classes with you, which would be another 6 months. So this is a pragmatic or a realistic explanation of why we say no one's joining us. Joining us does not mean fellowshipping. Doesn't mean they're not coming to our meetings. We ban them. Doesn't mean we don't go to church. It means they can't realistically join us. The other things, we don't even know what we believe on certain issues. So what are we going to even teach them? We're grappling with these issues ourselves. Okay, so we're running out of time. Just going to try to answer this one question. Issues of eating oil. I don't know why this has come up. So this person is asking a question, then they make a statement. The issues of eating oil is complicated. I don't know what's complicated about 2 choices. You eat or you don't eat. To me, that does not sound complicated. But may I simplify it? Yes. Eat oil or don't eat oil. It's as simple as that. Are we to access oil freely? I thought it was contrasted to be as bad as sugar and flesh meat, or it's as good advice. Wonder where they got that crazy idea from. We're talking about laws here, not good advice. So I want to read something to you. It's taken from a number of places, but I'm going to read it from Mind, Character and Personality, Volume 2. 2 MCP. No, yeah, 2 MCP, page 582. 2 MCP 582. I like this. On a certain occasion, when Betterton, a celebrated actor, was dining with Dr. Sheldon, then Archbishop of Canterbury, that's in the UK, the Archbishop said to him, "Pray, Mr. Betterton, tell me, why is it that you actors affect your audiences so powerfully by speaking of things imaginary?" "My lord," replied Betterton, "with due submission to your grace, permit me to say that the reason is plain. It all lies in the power of enthusiasm. We on the stage speak of things imaginary as if they were real, and you in the pulpit speak of things real as if they were imaginary." 2 MCP, page 582, 582. It's found in a number of different places. So I like that. And the reason why I said that is this issue about speaking strongly. Just because you speak strongly on one issue, it doesn't mean it's the only way to understand this issue or this subject. So, oil. I thought it was as bad as sugar. Oil is worse than sugar. And flesh meat. I think oil is worse than flesh meat. Is it good advice? Of course it's good advice. It's good advice not to eat something that's bad for you. Should we eat sugar? No. Should we eat flesh meat? No. Should we eat oil? No. Is it complicated? I don't think it's very complicated. I really don't think it's complicated. Is it good advice? Yes. Is there some kind of law? No. If you want to maintain health, I think it's a good idea to limit how much oil you eat. I think it depends what form the oil takes. If you take nuts and seeds, it's better for you. There are some oils that are better than other oils. If you talk about omega-3, omega-6, omega-9, different oils do different things to you. There's a current craze in the world at the moment with coconut oil. Everybody thinks coconut oil is a miracle cure for everything. It certainly isn't. Coconuts have been around for a long time. If it's so miracle, someone would have worked it out already. It's just a marketing ploy. I'm not saying it's worse or better than other oils. So, I don't know why people have this real issue with oil. They have a love affair with it. Oil serves some purposes. It makes food more palatable, especially when you fry them. It makes it taste nicer. It changes the texture of food. It's all about enjoyment. So, is it wrong to enjoy your food? I don't think it's wrong to enjoy your food. The problem is we can become fanatical about these issues and we say, okay, you can only enjoy healthy food, and if it's bad food, we shouldn't be doing it even if it's enjoyable. I'm not sure if God's actually constructed us and put us together that way. So, if we remain sort of reasonably balanced about it, be really careful about how much oil we eat, the form that it takes, if we heat the oil or if we don't heat the oil. There's all those issues about oil. If you want the strict rules, no oil, no sugar, no flesh meat, it's pretty straightforward. If you want to eat sugar, eat it in the form of fruit. If you want to eat oil, eat it in the form of nuts and seeds. And we shouldn't be eating flesh meat anyway. So, is that all good advice? Yes, I think it's really good advice. Is it some kind of law? I think you're going to struggle to make it a law, because what we end up doing is we take these steps. You go from step A to step B to step C, and suddenly good advice turns into law because you took these individual steps. And by the time you do that, if you step back, you say, how did I get from point A to point B? And I think it's these convoluted steps that we take where we end up controlling people how they should eat or how they should drink. I think people should be left to have some flexibility. If you're talking about a school setting like this, unless everybody wants oil, it's better not to put the oil in the food, and you can pour the oil in your own food if you wanted to, if you're desperate to have the oil. But really it's not good for you. It does not do your body any good taking oil in the refined way that most of us do. Extra virgin olive oil is not any better than regular olive oil. It's all marketing ploys, really. If you want to have a clean, safe diet, the best way to do that is eat whole foods. That's the best way to eat whole foods, which means don't take a hammer to anything and hit it. Just try and keep it in its whole food format. And no one does that. You know, your staple food, depending on, I probably get the name wrong, ugali, I don't know if that's the right name in this country, is it? What's the right name here? Posho. But it's the same thing, is that right? Yeah? It's ground up corn. You grind up corn, it's not good for you. You have the corn in its whole, boil it and eat it whole, like you do when you mix it with beans. It's far better for you. It's far safer to eat. Does less damage to you. It really is a big issue if you want to get serious about it. But it's all good advice. It's not criminality to grind corn up and make it into paste and eat it. It's not crime, but it's certainly not the best if you want to take best advice. Best advice is to eat it whole and chew it. Not best to take it down, grind it up and use it in the way that you do. It's not the best way. White corn is not as good as yellow corn. It's clear it's not as good because it's white and it's been all the colour has been stripped out either through cross-fertilisation or some other process. The colour is always better. But these are all good advices. Everyone here looks reasonably healthy. You can live a long life eating this poor quality food, which I would suggest that Posho is. It's not good quality food. It's poor quality. It's cheap food, but you still survive on it. The reason you survive is because you substitute it or you add vegetables and beans to it. Without vegetables and beans, you'd get ill really quickly eating that. You can live on beans and vegetables, no problem. You don't need, I'm going to just call it ugali, you don't need that. But it's the other way round, you'd get ill really quickly if you just had the cornmeal without the vegetables and beans. It fills you up, it gives you starch, it's energy. It's all good advice, it's not laws. So let's not get crazy about it. Let's not ask the cooks to change anything. We're not going to change the meal plan here. Hope I answered the question on oil. If you've got any other questions, you've seen there's presentations that I've done on oil, a number of them now, where I probably talk a lot stronger about the issue of oil than here. But yeah, it is really good advice. I don't think you're going to lose eternal life if you put oil onto your food. No, I really don't, because if you did, it'd become a legal issue. Yeah? Hope you all had a blessed Sabbath day. We'll close Sabbath and then we'll make a decision what we'll do. So if you could close Sabbath, say, with 2 songs. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for your goodness and your mercy. Lord, as we have experienced another period of restoration, help us to review our time together to see that whether or not we have refreshed one another, whether we have been refreshed ourselves, whether we have experienced a true Sabbath. Lord, help each of us to realize it's not what we can and what we cannot do that makes this day so special. It's just we can look around us, whether it's in the face of our brother and sister or the views and scenes of nature, that we can see that the work of restoration is a reality. Lord, may it become a reality in our lives as we continue to walk day by day with you, Sabbath by Sabbath. Father, we know we only have a short time left here on this planet. May each of us receive the blessing that you desire to give to us. May we be enriched and may we spend our time serving one another and finding true joy and happiness. Be with us and bless us, Father, as we enter into a new week, a new experience. In Jesus' name.